Hello, creatives. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about how you can develop a more expansive perspective when it comes to your creativity. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is creativity can be applied to different areas of your life. And we have a tendency, and this is probably the most common thing, is to associate creativity, doing something artistic or doing something creative, to either taking an art class, making a project, finishing a project, taking an idea and executing it. So sometimes it can be associated with I'm going to go and learn how to do plain air painting or watercolor, or in order to be creative, I have to know a specific technique or finish a specific project. And all of that is important. But what's important to also incorporate in your creative life is a more expansive perspective of what creativity can be in your life in all different areas of your life. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into that. What I love about creativity and what I know for sure in terms of my own life is that creativity wasn't just associated with something that I did. It was also associated with something far more than just making something or creating something. I have come to know and realize that creativity is far more beyond that in terms of ourselves, in terms of the actual art piece or the project, but that it can be something even deeper in terms of our relationship with creativity. So, I want to talk about how what I've learned about creativity is it does not want to be confined in a box. In other words, creativity is only maybe you started realistic painting. That's similar to what I ended up doing is I was painting oil paintings that were realistic flowers, seascapes, and then that became my confined idea of what creativity was. And then when I became a graphic designer, it was almost like, oh, I'm applying my creative juices, my creative energy into creating graphic design. And then I kind of didn't see creativity in other areas of my life. So that's just an idea in terms of creativity loves to breathe. It doesn't always want to be confined or limited to one idea, one form of creating. And I admire those creative professionals or artists that stick with one style, medium, whether that's performing or dancing, mixed media, and they stick with that for their entire career. I'm kind of not like that. I feel like my own creative spirit loves to go in 150% when it's learning something, executing something. But then at a certain point, I notice that it needs a little bit of breathing room. It gets antsy and restless and it wants to learn something new, or it's calling me to apply my creativity elsewhere in certain projects, or maybe it's writing, or maybe it's, rearranging my succulents in my garden. And, that's just the idea that creativity will draw you and call you into different places and different applications. But in addition to that, it really is about your relationship with the creative process is really your relationship with yourself as well. And the reason why I say that is because everything that we face in the creative process, frustration, self-doubt, comparison, criticism, self-judgment, insecurity, frustration, and being stuck, some of those places that we come to in our creative process are also places that we come to in other aspects of our life. So I feel like when we develop this sort of trusting relationship with the creative process, well, I trust myself in the creative process. I trust that, okay, I'm at this place of frustration or self doubt, but I trust in the process that I will get through it or move through it, or I trust in myself and my skills to be able to move through it and figure out where I end up at the other end. Developing that trusting relationship when things don't work out with what you're creating. Now, how does that apply to your life? Well, if you're faced with sort of a challenging situation that just comes up out of nowhere unexpectedly, or there's some uncertainty that you're facing, you are able to trust in yourself to ride out that period of challenge or difficulty, trusting that, okay, I have the skills, I have the ability to tap into my own inner wisdom, I have my life experience to draw upon, I have my creative practice that can quiet my mind, quiet my spirit so that I can get clear on what I need to do. And that is part of what I mean by having more of an expansive perspective on what creativity can be in your life. It can also be developing a more meaningful connection to life. Creativity, I believe, gives you that extra meaning that you can attach to those moments in your life. Like, for example, you go out and you go grab a cup of coffee and you have connection with somebody, a short conversation, and that in itself becomes meaningful. I believe creativity kind of infuses those moments, infuses the moments when we're in nature and we take a look at the sky during sunset and the way that the clouds are sprinkled on the pink sky. And in that moment, it's almost like looking at a painting, or you are sort of taken back by the colors of the sky. And that is creative spirit in that moment, making that moment meaningful. So I think it's important to think about how creativity can add meaning in your life. I know that we live now in a more digital world, right? And that digital world can seem somewhat two-dimensional, even though as dimensional as they can become in terms of all this technology that creates these worlds and movies that give you this dimension and richness, it's still two-dimensional. And the reason why I bring that up is because that is one of the reasons why I decided to jump into mixed media, because I had been working as a graphic designer in a two-dimensional world. Even when you print out the design that you created on the computer, it's still two-dimensional on the paper. But I was working in the computer primarily, and even though I was trained with hand skills, at the time, I was losing that sense of that sort of feeling the paper, the movement of the pen when you're sketching, that sort of thing became less and less because graphic design became strictly on the computer. So when I decided to close my private practice as a therapist and pursue a career as an artist, I was almost determined to want to recreate things that I know could be done in Photoshop, but I wanted to recreate that by hand so that I could actually feel the movement of the brush applying the paint to the canvas, feeling the tearing of collage paper. I mean, it's so different when you're doing that. And that brought more meaning into my creativity. So that's just an example of how meaning can be applied and pulled into your creative life in those small moments throughout your day. So I want to read a quote from Agape Stassinopoulos from her book Speaking with Spirit. Open up to your creativity is a form of prayer. You allow yourself to go beyond your personality, your ego, and your judgments and crack the door open to your soul. I love this quote because it really reflects on when we can get beyond our personality and ego and judgments and even preconceived ideas of who we are in those limited perspectives. When we get past that, we now are able to connect to our true soul and our true creative spirit. Another thing that I think of too is when I'm watching documentaries about artists' life, their careers, their personal life, their art, or movies that have a creative theme underneath it. There's docudramas also about artists and their lives, and I always find them fascinating because it almost fuels my creative inspiration, not in terms of necessarily my own art making, but gaining a deeper understanding and more of expansive understanding of what creativity represented in other people's lives and other artists' lives. I feel like when I watch those movies and documentaries, it really gives me a in-depth look into how creativity plays out in different places and in different aspects in the world. So, one of the things that I also love doing is listening to music and allowing my imagination to sort of flow. There's a thing about daydreaming. We probably have lost or don't spend a lot of time daydreaming. It's just sitting outside with a cup of tea or even a cup of coffee and just allowing yourself to daydream. There is something about that's where I believe creative spirit sort of takes your imagination elsewhere. You start putting things together. You kind of come up with these new ideas or understanding or imagine other worlds or even imagining conversations as well. There's something about listening to music and allowing the creativity through the music take you away with your imagination and daydreaming. I think that's something that's also good. But also, in terms of continuing to expand that perspective around creativity and your creativity, creativity is a form of self-care. It's a way to de-stress when you're feeling anxious. It's a place that you can go to for solace or calm when you feel like the world or maybe what you're going through in your life is chaotic. You can always resort to creativity as a place to sort of escape and regain a sense of wholeness. I really believe because creativity offers that gift to us, it's an aid or an assistance to helping us become more resilient in life. I know for me that when I am feeling, off-centered or even lonely, if I'm feeling kind of isolated or alone, I can go to creativity as a way to keep me company, as a way to just take me to a place where I can get recentered and reconnected with myself. And it's almost as if once I start making art or once I'm doing something creative, it reminds me of who I am. So, these are just some examples of how you can expand creativity in your life. Um, I think that you can determine for yourself how creativity can play out in different areas of your life and in what ways. So that's important to maybe take a look at your creativity not just by taking the art class or making the art piece or the project, but how does creativity play out in different ways? You determine that, because I think, like some of the things that I've brought up, we kind of take those things for granted. We take for granted, a glance at a tree that's swaying in the wind, and we don't take time to just kind of follow the rhythm of that and see how creative spirit exists within that moment. We take for granted some of those moments in our life. So I believe that all those little moments are just expansive ways to look at creativity in your life. So remember, they're infused with your creative spirit, and maybe, consider ways in your everyday life. How can I expand this idea, how creativity exists in my life? So that was something I wanted to share with you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for listening. And until next time, stay creating. Bye. Are you just embarking on your creative journey and don't yet have an art practice established? Well, I want to be here to support your development. So I'm inviting you to check out these 2 online courses specifically designed by me for the beginning artist. They are easy to dive into with little to no art experience. It's my art journaling for beginners and my mixed media minis. Just go to truecreativitywithin.com and you'll find a collection of self-paced online courses to help inspire your creative spirit and get your creative journey started.